You come to a fork in the road, and life always gives you forks. There is never a straight path. And you have a choice. And you have a choice. You own your life.
Marilyn Robinson has been spectacularly successful at navigating life's bumps. Major challenges such as the death of her parents, career changes, they were all handled in stride. It helps that she's a real people person and an extrovert. But beyond that, she's an optimist. And that viewpoint has shaped her life and allowed her to navigate bumps with grace. We can all learn from her. Please welcome Marilyn Robinson to Bump in the Road. Marilyn, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Okay. Well, and it's a story I don't talk about very much because it happened when I was 10. My parents were killed in an airplane accident, and it happened that my brother was flying the plane. And the weirdest thing about it was they were all in the plane because a friend of my mom's from her teenage childhood had flown out. We lived in Southern California, had flown out, and the airport in which he was flying into was fogged out. So they put him into the airport nearest us. And he remembered that my mother lived nearby. And somehow back then, I'm dating myself, but there wasn't internet, there wasn't cell phones. Somehow he found her number and called. And so of course, my mom being my mom, invited him to come visit. Well, the funny story is that this is the guy who competed for my mom's attention while my dad was dating her. So this is juicy, you know. In fact, I didn't know all of this until I found her diary later on, and then it told me about, oh, Ray did this, and Art did this, and da da da. So that was the thing I didn't know at the time. Um, but now I look back and I say, now I know why my dad was insistent on going on that flight because my brother was accruing hours. He had his pilot license, so he always had a plane booked, and he would go up and accrue hours so he could eventually get into the airline
Mhm.
school. So, but the interesting thing about the weekend is Art was I wouldn't say he was intuitive or anything, but he just the universe was preparing us. So first off, my brother had just gotten a new a 65. This was in 1968. So he had gotten a 1965 Corvette, so fairly new.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he was taking his girlfriend out on Friday night, and Art goes, "Well, you better be careful. That's a pretty nice car you got there." Well, sure shit enough, if he was at a stoplight and the guy in front of him had pulled out too far into the intersection and just randomly backed up into him.
Oh
And
my God.
back then, those days, Corvettes were mostly all fiberglass. So it was that little bump was a major impact on the car. So we're like, God, that was kind of weird. Art kind of. So then Sunday comes along, and my parents were like, it was a four-seater plane. So there was room for both of my parents to go and Art and my brother. And he was going to fly him down to the airport that he was intended to go to. And so no biggie. On the way back. So, but Art said, "Oh, and us kids were around. I was 10, my other sister was 13, and my other sister was 15. And we were staying home, obviously. And he said, well, you both shouldn't go. What if something should happen? You'll leave the kids without parents. So
Wow.
okay, so now we're absorbing this as kids, and it's December 8th before Christmas, so we're walking to the mall to do our Christmas shopping, and all the way there, we're saying, "Well, what would happen to us? Oh my gosh, what would happen?" And so we had speculated that our older sister, who was 26 at the time, would take us in, or we were raised Catholic, so we all had godfathers, and so we thought the other option was we'd get parsed off to the godfathers. And so we had it all mapped out that our older sister would take us and everything. And we got home. And they were supposed to be home around 3 o'clock, and they didn't get home. They didn't get home. And so about 5 o'clock, my 15-year-old sister calls the airport. Well, it's this little podunk airport that doesn't even have a tower. It's just run on a radio.
Mhm.
And the idiots basically didn't qualify who they were talking to. They said, "Well, we don't know who was on board the plane, but the plane that was checked out by Raymond Charles Jr., it crashed upon return." And just at that
Oh my
time,
god.
my cousin pulls into the driveway because they had notified next of kin, which was my uncle, and he had sent his son over to come and get us. So so we had the preparation to be prepared. So
That's
that was
really bizarre. I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, it's prescient is what it
yeah.
is.
Yeah. And of course, immediately as a 10-year-old, I hated Art because I saw him at the funeral and I didn't want to have anything to do with him because, he was the cause of it. If he hadn't showed up, none of this would have happened, in my mind.
Yeah.
Um, you go through the whole, I was raised in the Catholic Church, so I'm screaming and yelling, running through the house, asking God why, and going through all of those emotions. Even though I was quasi prepared by Art.
You're never
So
prepared. You're never prepared for something like that.
no, no. And there's so many emotions that go along with this when I think about it. The first emotion that comes up is, my kids were raised pretty much without grandparents. And that to me is a big loss. So they didn't ever get to know my parents. And my husband is from New York. So they got to see that set of grandparents once a year when we would go visit. So they didn't have that family extension. Granted, my older sister, still played kind of a senior role in our family, um, but it's not quite the same. And I loved my parents, so I would have wanted my kids, to meet them. The thing that, I was always a responsible child. My sister that was 13 at the time, she was having seizures. They thought it was epilepsy. They didn't know there was such a thing as child seizures at the time. Now if you grow out of it, it's called child seizures. If you don't grow out of it, you have epilepsy. Well, my mom said, "Oh, from the age of 6, you gotta hang around with her after, when you're out running around and playing, because if she has a seizure, I need you to run up to the nearest door and knock on it, and if nobody answers, go to the next door until you can find an adult for help." Well, it turned out she just had her seizures at night, so that never happened. But even as a child, I was given responsibility. So I think of when my parents died, I think of it as I really became an adult. Now that I've gone through all the, emotional reflections and all the different
Yeah.
things that I've done in my life to, find out who I am and what my purpose is. You know, how you get into all those classes. Well, I realized that I became an adult at 10 because my oldest sister, dear as she um, is not a nurturing type. She's very analytic. And so everything was more of a kind of business transaction. Like, okay, she's now inherited 3 children so I mean, you could literally we cleaned house twice a week, and every time you got out of the tub, even if you just showered, you had to scrub it down with comment. I mean, you could eat off the surfaces in this house because it was always cleaning. But I it was she didn't have the bandwidth. She was pregnant with her first son. She was still working full time. She got to inherit 3, worst age teenagers.
Yeah, really.
I was pretty good, but my 15-year-old sister was a pain in the ass. And then my 13-year-old sister, she was in that hormonal stage. So she really took it. She blames everything that happened in her life on her parents dying, kind of emotional. So she took it differently than I did. But, it
In
made
retrospect, how did that send what did that do to you, to your life path? How do you think it changed?
Well, I think the what I look at, the best thing that happened to me is I got out of Cement City, LA, and into the foothills of Northern California. And
Wow.
I my sister camped, she had a boat, we hiked, we biked. I mean, I did some of those things in LA, but not very they weren't as accessible. I didn't camp and I didn't boat, but I did do some hiking and I obviously had a bicycle. We had roads and roads and roads of bicycles. Um, but it really introduced me to the outdoors and the love of the outdoors. As a even where we lived, there was, open terrain, and I would get on a path that the deer made, that
Mhm.
the critters made, and just follow it, and it just created such an imaginary I have a great storytelling, imaginary kind of personality, so I would, as a kid, 10 years old, I would wander these paths thinking about who and what I'm gonna see. Is there gonna be a fairy around the corner? Those kind of things. Or will I see a gnome? I love gnomes. I just don't know what there is about those little statues. Uh, so that was the best thing that happened. And so I met my husband, who is also an outdoorsy person, and we raised our kids doing all kinds of outdoor sports. And now they're outdoors people. And we all value the what nature brings you. There's something about just going outside and grounding yourself. If you can take a break from your work, even if it's to walk over to a window and look outside, there's so much value in, attaching to nature. I think it was my first lesson in learning how to find the good in the bad.
That's a big lesson to learn at 10.
Yes. And so everything that has happened to me through life, I've always stepped back and say, what can I learn from this? And what's the good thing? There's always a good thing, and it's either a lesson or a new opportunity or something, a new skill to develop, whatever. There's something. There's always at least one good thing that comes out of the bad.
Yeah, I agree with you. I adopted that perspective, I think, a little bit later in life, but it's been one that has been invaluable to me. And my daily mantra is, what can I learn? Because there is something in some interaction, in something you do or think that can
Yeah.
spur you along that path of greater personal knowledge.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And it doesn't take a lot of energy just to pause and say, okay, what's going on right now? Why am I feeling this way? What really happened? Why did I react that way? And it doesn't take a lot of energy to reflect. And like I said, um, there's just an opportunity. Like another opportunity was I became a babysitter. I wasn't babysitting when I was in LA, but I started babysitting my nephew when he was born. And then I branched off into all of my sister's friends who had kids and became a babysitter. And I knew right away that I loved babies and that I was going to be a mother. So, again, I got a lot of practice. I got a lot of experience. I was very comfortable and confident. So when I did have my children, I was very comfortable and very confident. So that too was a blessing to be in a household, my sister's, with two boys. Eventually, she had two boys, and so that was another distant outcome of the event. And that's what I'm doing now. Is I'm a parent coach. I think of it more as a parenting strategist versus, yeah, I can help you with the day-to-day stuff. But if you step back and again stop and think about
Hmm.
how you want to parent and how you want to do that, then you're prepared, when the situation comes different situations come up, because you already have in your mind a framework of how you want to respond and how you want to handle situations. So all of it, again, full circle, coming around and using those skills. And I think I grew up faster because I had two older sisters that, taught me how to drink at a way young age. Because well, even my older sister, she'd have parties at 26. She'd have parties at the house And, I can't help but sneak a drink. So there were some things of growing up sooner, but it was great because when I did finally get into the age where you drank a lot, I wasn't interested. It's like, oh, been there, done that. That's not fun waking up with a headache.
I'm going back to when your parents passed and your other siblings, did they react very differently than you did?
I think my sister that was 13 was running through the house with me, if I recall. Debbie was still on the phone. So she being the oldest and the one that was babysitting us, she had to take on more of the adult role.
I mean,
And
being as opposed to you really found the positive in a very difficult situation. Did your other siblings also take that path, or did they go more the victim route? Were they
um,
angry?
my sister that was 13 at the time, she's still with me and she is still a victim of it. She just likes to use it for everything that ever has gone wrong in her life. And I learned this from her husband, who has since passed. But I was talking to him and he goes, "Yeah, she still carries that with her and blames anything that ever happens to her that she doesn't like. She blames it on the fact that she lost her parents so young." And my other sister that was 15, her and I are very similar in personality. I mean, to the point that we can go into the same jewelry store and buy the same frickin' ring. And I go, "What? When did you buy yours?" "Okay, well, you have to take yours back. I bought mine first." you know, but she was, and I think because she was 15, she was past that hormonal stage of life. And so I think what impacted my other sister who was 13 was she was just at that stage of I want to be independent. I don't want to be independent. Her hormones are changing, all of that. So I think emotionally it may have impacted her a little stronger. I was not in that realm. So being young, I was seeing things through my child eyes, and then Debbie, who was 15, was pretty much already aware of the tragedies in life, and I think accepted it in stride, you know, and stepped up to the responsibility.
I always find it fascinating, given any event, how three people witness an event. You have three different perspectives on it, and they're all
Mhm.
valid for different reasons.
Yeah.
I just find it so fascinating to see how we filter our experiences and I look at how we decide to use that.
Yeah.
Hopefully for a good purpose.
Yeah. I think that partly, again, when you're a child, even at 10, yeah, I'd had some battles or confrontations with girls at school and stuff like that, but I still had that childish confidence. I hadn't been beaten down enough. So I think that allowed me to be more um accepting of the situation and looking at it a little differently, whereas my sister that was 13, in the hormonal stage of her life, was I think probably responded more emotionally than I did.
Well, and
You
just being
know.
a teenager is tough no matter what. It's just a tough
Yeah.
phase of life.
Yeah.
But you hit
So
another
I
big bump when you pivoted your career, didn't you?
Yeah, so I went into I got a degree in computer science, got a while I was at school, got a job programming and said, "What the hell have I done?" As you can tell, I'm an extrovert. So sitting at a terminal all day coding was not, so I would reach out and I was like, "Oh my gosh." So I ended up deciding that I wanted to sell computers. So I got a job at Intel, and it was great in some respects because I was one of the first four female salespeople hired. So engineers would open the door and want to see who this lady is. So I would get appointments that the guys in the office who had the account before me couldn't get. So that's the blessing. But then I did, I did after about 10 years, started my family, and I was climbing the ladder. I was career oriented, and I wanted, decide I was on my 3rd child basically when the other bump in the road came, and, well, not that there weren't a bunch of bumps in the road, but this, when you ask me bump in the road, it's like, okay, what comes to mind? And
Yeah.
it was just an irritating situation. Just pissed me off. So so I went ahead and I decided with my 3rd child. My first 2 children, man, workaholic, career lady, I went back to work 6 weeks after. Now that I look at my daughter who just had a baby in December and I think, "Boy, I went back to work in 6 weeks. Was I even healed?"
Yeah.
You know? Was I physically ready to go back in 6 weeks? That just even, let alone I lucked out, my older sister was my nanny, so I didn't have to worry about my kids in daycare, but, anyway, yes, sidetracked. Um, so I decided to take the extended leave, so I was out for 12 weeks instead of just the 6 weeks. And lo and behold, while I was gone, I worked in this group of men, and again, the only woman, and they would have the evening chats around the copy machine and hallway conversation at the end of the day, and I never quite felt like I fit in. One, because typically I had to leave because I had to go
Yeah.
pick up kids from daycare, and they didn't, and so they hung out. But I never really felt like I fit in. And so while I was gone, they I don't it wasn't they decided they needed another position because it didn't exist when I left. But they promoted this guy over me. And so when I came back, I found
Mm.
out that this guy is now my boss. And, I'm sorry, the guy was an idiot. And the reason they gave was that he was more technical than me. Well, Intel had a policy of doing two in a box. So if you had a requirement that required different skills, but you couldn't find an individual who had all the skills, you could do two in a box, finding two people who complement each other. That would
Hmm.
have been the ideal situation because I was the outward sales and marketing person, and he was the inward focused, working with the technical marketing teams and stuff. Well, my husband even knew him and said, "That guy doesn't have a technical bone in his body. What the hell are they talking about?" And he worked in the same group. So so, so the thing was is that at that point, here I am, I'm coming back off of my 3rd. The job required that I travel to Asia. In fact, I was my last trip to Asia, I was 6 months pregnant with this baby, and so she got to see a couple of countries in Asia, from my belly. Uh, but, it was one of those things where, I felt my first reaction was I was pissed off. And I just like didn't it was one of those where there was also a cultural thing that my boss was from India. And so in my mind, I'm like, okay, I was the one that took him over and how taught him how to work Asia. And he really appreciated that when he came in because I was doing the job before he did. But I still had in the back of my mind that 1, I'm a woman, and 2, I'm a Caucasian woman, and so, it was easier for him to pick the male who was, um, not Caucasian. I'm not sure exactly what his nationality was, but, I don't know if he was from India, but from one of those countries. So I think it was he was present because I was on maternity leave. He was another, a fellow national, and quote, they tossed on the technical. So the funny thing is that even though I'd been gone for 12 weeks, when you're in sales and you sell to the same customers over and over and you do demand forecasts over and over, we go into a meeting and when I return and we're doing kind of a demand forecast by customer, what's going on with these accounts, are they going to buy, da da da, and he's looking to this new manager for all the answers. Well, the guy doesn't have a clue how to do my job, and so I sat there and I let him berate the guy in the meeting for, oh, I know, 5-10 minutes, and I just sat back and said, well, you deserve this because you picked him. And then finally I got frustrated and I leaned forward in the meeting and I said, "Why are you asking him something he doesn't have a clue about?" You should be talking to me."
And that was a turning point in terms of career choice for you? That set of
Yeah.
circumstances?
Yeah, I think I had already decided, I think when I was traveling 6 months pregnant that I really was done traveling to Asia. Because it's such a long flight. You always go for at least 2 weeks. A lot of my trips were 3 weeks long to be gone from my kids. So it was like, and I only had to go once a quarter, but 4 trips a year, that's a lot of traveling, or at least 3 trips a year. Um so I had already in the back of my mind thought that it was time to find something that required less travel. And that was one thing that was nice about Intel. I didn't have to leave Intel to change jobs. I could easily find something within Intel.
Mhm.
And so when I came back to work and there was no way I was going to work for this guy. I mean, I'm pretty adaptable, but I decided I didn't deserve that. And I wasn't already, like I said, didn't feel really part of the community. So I went into my boss and I told him, I said, I don't want to travel anymore. I've got 3 kids at home. I'm going to go look for a job that's more, project management type and not doesn't require me getting on a plane. And he goes, "Oh, well, you can do the job via phone." And again, remember, this is before internet. This is before massive email.
Mhm.
Um, you know, and so, I mean, there was some email at least, but it wasn't like the way it is
No,
now.
you had to
Everything.
know DOS, so you had to be able to program DOS to get on the internet when it first came out. You did.
Yeah.
You had to develop minimal skills in order to access the web. I remember it
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, so you could dial from your phone in the office and hopefully reach somebody in their office in Asia. But Asia is a face-to-face culture. I mean, that's just the way
Well,
they
there's a
like to
little
do
bit of a
business.
time difference. There are
Oh,
a lot
yeah.
of elements that can get lost, I think, in a conversation versus in a one-on-one
Yeah.
meeting.
Yeah. So I ended up making that decision, to move on. And it was I found a more stable routine, 8 to 5:30 kinda job, and it did reduce quite a bit of stress. I wasn't looking for, I'd already climbed enough rungs. I didn't need any more stripes on my shoulder. I even, when I was looking for jobs, I even said, "You can take a stripe off if it makes you feel more comfortable putting me in this position." I mean, I was very flexible. Um, so I think it was less stressful and it allowed me to be more present for my children. And eventually, when they got old enough and had soccer practices, I was able to leave at 3 o'clock and get them to their practices. I did still have, it was interesting. One of the project job I had, what I had a team in Swindon, England, and a team in Asia. And so I would leave early at 3 and take my daughter, and then I'd go home and be on the phone with my team in Asia, but it was all on project stuff, so it wasn't like I was just getting updates or giving them, updates and direction, so it didn't matter, I didn't need to be in person for that.
And now you're an entrepreneur. How did that come to be?
Well, I started off by when I left Intel because I was too young to be considered retired. So when I left, I got involved with, I homeschooled. So first off, we homeschooled for 3 years. That was phenomenal. The world was our classroom. We went to, when we studied the Mayan ruins, we went to Chichen Itza and climbed it. And now they don't let you
Yeah,
climb
you
it
can't
anymore.
climb it anymore.
Yeah, so my kids had that wonderful opportunity. The funniest thing is I've always wanted to, I'm fascinated with colonial stories and stuff. So I wanted to go see Jamestown and Williamsburg and Gettysburg and Philadelphia and all that. So I did it more for me. Um, and when I went to Jamestown, I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is Jamestown. This is just nothing. This is like a little trading store." I mean, it was such a small community, but that's what it was back then. And then so I think the path was from there, getting involved. I'm not a couch potato. I have hobbies and I do like to work in the yard and I've always had a garden. So I had things to keep me busy, but I needed intellectual stuff.
Yeah.
So I got involved in the high school and um, took over running the student store. So a girlfriend and I said, I won't do it alone because I don't want 100% responsibility. I want to be able to go on vacation or leave and know that somebody else is there to take phone calls if something happens. So another soccer mom that my son and her son played soccer together. We took over the store and we ended up moving it from the janitor's closet to they remodeled the cafeteria and they gave us a 10 by 10 room. So we are like, whoa. So I got into volunteering. And then as my kids aged out of high school, I said, well, why my husband says, you got a friggin' part-time job there. You work at least 25 hours a week. I said, the difference, he goes, but you don't get paid for it. I said, yeah. And I also don't get a performance review and have to worry about, satisfying any bosses because, these people think I walk on water because I'm volunteering 25 hours a week.
The thing that just so strikes me about your story is you have handled transitions with enormous grace, as opposed to many of us who do not.
Yeah.
You've just taken on
Yeah.
incremental change and you've done it very well and very successfully.
I think I look at it as as an opportunity and challenge. It's like, oh, how can it's a problem. I love problem solving. I'm a puzzle person. I love puzzles. I love games on my phone that are more puzzle oriented. And so the Sudoku is more like a puzzle. I don't like the action packed games. My son goes, "Oh, let me find you a good game." No, I don't want your kind of game.
So,
But
looking back at all this, what would you say to people if you could give them three pieces of advice in terms of navigating these inevitable changes that come at you at life? What would you say to them?
Well, I'm a picture person. So the first thing you said when you asked me that, first thing I thought when you asked me that was you come to a fork in the road and life always gives you forks. There is never a straight path and you have a choice and you have a choice. You own your life.